Now it's time to have a look at IPN, which is basically instant payment notification. Now, what instant payment notification is? As it says, it's instant response with the payment status, basically. So when the client comes back from a PayPal's website after clicking pay button, the transaction has gone through PayPal, but it may have been successful, it may have been unsuccessful for any reason, and obviously we won't know about this. And if we want to dispatch goods, rather than logging into the PayPal's account and checking in whether the transaction has been successful, we can actually get the response from PayPal, which will confirm whether the transaction was okay or not. And then we can check on our own system within the dedicated control panel whether this specific transaction has been processed by PayPal, whether PayPal has approved the payment, and so on. So this is what IPN is going to help us to do. So first thing we need to do is, obviously we've provided the IPN URL inside of our PayPal class. If we go back to our PayPal class, scroll down, we had our IPN here. There we go. It's notify URL, which is $page equals IPN. So obviously we need to create this page inside of our pages folder. So let's create a new file, call it ipn.php. Now the first thing we're going to do in this file is not going to have many lines of code actually. It's going to be an opening PHP tag. We first create object PayPal, which is a new PayPal class, and now object PayPal, and we only call one method, IPN, and that's all within this specific file. We don't need the structure of the page, as it's not the page for someone to look at. It's only for the information to be sent to this page from PayPal. PayPal will send us the post with all this status data. We need to process it, go back to PayPal to confirm whether this has been actually received from them, whether they have this kind of record. And then once they verify this, as you can see, we've got two calls. Once they verify this, we can process our order and change the status to actually paid. Okay, so let's close our IPN.php, and we are inside of our PayPal.php class. And we need to create our IPN method. So if we scroll right to the bottom, I'm going to hide this browser on the left. Okay, a few new lines again, something like this. And now we start with public function IPN. We don't pass any parameters to this method. And we start with if this validate IPN. So this is the method which we're going to create right now. Validate IPN. We can create actually right before our IPN method. So that's one after the other. So we start with private function, as we're not going to be using this outside of the class, validate IPN. Okay, so first of all, we're going to create the variable host name. And we're going to use the function get host by address, and we're going to pass server remote underscore ADDR for remote address constant. So we have the server. Now we're check if post has been received from PayPal.com. If, and now preg match, we're using the regular expression here, very simple one, basically /PayPal /com, and then $sign after this, because we may have anything else after that, and host name. If it matches, basically if PayPal.com has been found inside of this variable, then return false. Sorry, if it hasn't been found, obviously because we have exclamation mark. So if it hasn't been found, return false. Then get all posted variables and put them to array. So object form equals new form, and now this _IPN _data equals object form get post array, which is basically going to put all of the posts which has been received from PayPal into this IPN data array. Okay, now we're going to check if email of the business matches the email received. Let's put on new line in post from IPN. So if we scroll up a little bit, if, and let's put it on separate lines, isn't empty this IPN data and string to lower, we want to make sure that everything matches the same case, this underscore IPN data receiver email underscore email. Actually, let's make sure that this is actually in this array. So array key exists, and we have this receiver email inside of our IPN data array, obviously. So if it exists, and then and string to lower doesn't equal, and now string to lower, and we can this underscore business, which means if receiver email address doesn't match our business email address, that means that someone's been mucking with the code, obviously, and that's not going to obviously wait a second, and we should actually enclose this within actually no, we don't have to, that's fine, because it's AND statement. So obviously that means that someone's trying to send data. We need to obviously, this method basically is to make sure that whatever we get, whatever response we get, that it comes from PayPal, and obviously all this information must match. So if it doesn't, then obviously return false as well. Otherwise, return true. So if all these two if statements return true, basically if they are not successful, then the response from the method will be true. So this is something what we need for this statement here to be processed further. So let's move to the next video and have a look at what's going to happen actually inside of this if statement here. First thing we need to do after we validated our IPN is to call the new method, which will be this, send curl. We will be using curl, PHP curl library. If we go to our browser, go to php.net, manual, en, or whichever other language, book.curl.php. This library has several different methods, obviously, functions you can use with it. So if you want to go through the whole documentation, please feel free. But let's go to our example here. If we scroll up before our IPN method and create the new private function get send curl, the first thing we're gonna do is we create the variable called response, and we'll assign this get return params method. Obviously this method doesn't exist inside of our class yet, so before our send curl, a few new lines again, and we start with private function get return params. We start with out, which is array, and we pass the first item to this array, which will be cmd equals underscore notify hyphen validate, which is one of the parameters which we need to send back to PayPal after we've received response from IPN. We need to send it back with several different options. So this is our first one, and then if isn't empty, this underscore IPN underscore data, then we're going to use for each loop of this underscore IPN underscore data as key equals value, and now value equals function exists. We check if get magic quotes GPC function exists, magic quotes gpc exist? If it does, we want value to be URL encoded, strip slashes, and we pass the value to it. Otherwise, we simply URL encode our value. You have to remember that all values sent back to PayPal have to be URL encoded. Otherwise, we're gonna get errors. Okay, so that's our value filtered and now out. And we're adding key in curly braces, actually without any spaces, then equal curly brace value in between the double quotes and then semicolon. Okay, so that's our array ready after all of our after our for each loop, and now simply return implode function. We're going to use and symbol and our array to be concatenated with this symbol. Okay, so that's everything inside of the get return params method. Now let's move with our send curl method. First we start with the variable curl init. We're basically initializing the curl. Now curl set opt function, we pass our variable, and now first constant curl opt URL, which basically will be this underscore URL to PayPal. Then we have curl set opt, again another option, ch again instance. Then we have curl opt return transfer, which we set to 1. We can actually copy this whole line. Then we have curl opt post set to 1 as well. Then we have curl opt post fields, which will basically be all of our fields, the whole string which we've created using get return params here. If we copy this whole thing, after post fields we have header, and we set this to null. Then we have curl opt http header, and that's going to be array. And we pass 2 parameters. First one will be content hyphen type colon application x www hyphen again form hyphen URL encoded, then comma, and the next one will be content length colon, then double quote. Then we're going to concatenate it with the dots strl len string len of our response basically, and that's everything for this specific option. Then we have, if we copy this one from here, curl opt, we have curl opt verbose, so verbose, and the value will be 1. Then we have SSL underscore verify PEER, which will be set to false. And then we have follow location, which basically will be 1. After follow location we have timeout, which will be 30 seconds. And then we have, after all this underscore IPN result equals curl underscore exec, and we pass our instance. Okay, then curl close and ch. Okay, so the response obviously from this call will be stored within our IPN result parameter. So that's our send curl done. Let's go back to our IPN and continue with it in the next video. So now let's move on with our IPN method. After send curl, we check if strcmp, which is string compare, basically this underscore IPN result, which is basically going to have the result returned by this send curl method. Sorry, inside of the string compare we have two parameters, and the value will be verified, which is what we want to get if our transaction was successful, and obviously PayPal has sent our IPN. We return all the values back. We want the PayPal to come back to us again with the verified answer, basically that the order has been verified. So if verified equals 0, if it returned, I mean, basically comparing, a string compare basically checks two parameters and checks if they are exactly the same. If they are, it will return 0. So obviously if these two are the same, which means IPN result must have equal verified, then we return 0, which means everything's been successful and everything's fine. So if it did, then we continue, we create object order, which is our new order class. If we scroll up a little bit, and now we need to update our order status. So if isn't empty, this underscore IPN underscore data, then object order, and we're going to call method called approve, and we will pass 3 parameters from our IPN data array. It will be IPN underscore data txn underscore ID, then comma, this underscore IPN data payment underscore status, and the last one will be this underscore IPN data custom. Custom is basically the ID of our order. So we can now identify this order by actually populating this information from the information which PayPal sent back to us. Because as you may remember, we've sent this custom field to PayPal in the first place after we've created the order and the customer has clicked on Pay with PayPal. This custom field has been included, and it included the ID of our order. So now we can identify the specific order by actually referring to this returned from PayPal custom field. So let's move to the next video and create our approve method inside of the order class. Okay, so now we need to create our approve method. But before we do so, I just realized I've made a mistake here. It should be txn -id. Okay, let's open our order class. So classes folder, order.php. We can now close the browser, scroll right to the bottom, and we're going to start creating our new method. So a few new lines. The new method will be called public function approve. And we will pass 3 parameters, txn ID, by default null. Then we have payment status, by default null. And then we have ID, by default 0. Now we check in if txn ID, sorry, if it isn't empty actually. So it isn't empty txn underscore ID, and we copy the name of this parameter, isn't empty payment status. Active variable, we check if payment status equals completed, which is what we want to get, then 1, otherwise 0. Now our SQL statement, so SQL equals update this underscore table, set pp underscore status equal single quote, then we concatenate with this db escape, and we put our active variable. then concatenate again with dot single quote. Sorry, we need a comma after the single quote as well, because the next one will be txn id equals single quote concatenation this db escape, and we have this time it's going to be txn underscore id, then concatenation with dot single quote comma, then we have payment status equals single quote this db escape, and we're passing payment status to it, and concatenating single quote without comma this time, where id equals single quote dot this db escape, and we're passing id to it. And then concatenation single quote right at the end and semicolon. I've just realized I made a mistake. It shouldn't be actually 0, it should be null as well, and we also need to check if it isn't empty here. So isn't empty id, because it's basically id of the order. So this db query, and we pass in a SQL statement. Okay, let's go back to our PayPal class. After our if statement, we want to call another method, this save log, and this is the method which we're going to be working on in the next video. So now it's time to create our save log method, which basically takes all of the parameters sent by PayPal and saves them into the text file. So if we scroll down, create a few new lines. So if we start with private function save log, and first of all we're going to check if this underscore log file doesn't equal null. That means that we obviously provided the path and the file name, which is cool. Now we start with out array, then we get current date. So out, we add into our array date colon, and then we concatenate it with the date in the format D M Y H I S, which is day, month, year, hour, minute, and second basically. And let's pass the second parameter as time. Okay, so we've got our date, then we have status, which will be out equals status, and then we have this underscore IPN result after status. If we scroll up a little bit, we have log the post variables. Okay, and we're going to do out equals IPN response. Then we create colon, we create a couple of new lines in a text file. Then we have if isn't empty, this underscore IPN underscore data. We're going to do the loop for each this underscore IPN underscore data as key equals value. We have out equals, and between the double quotes, curly brace key, closing curly brace, colon, in between the curly brace value, and closing one, and semicolon right at the end. After this, we need to open and write to the log file. Okay, so we start with fp equals fopen this underscore log file, and we want to pass the second parameter as a, which will allow us to basically write to the file right at the end of the file, basically of the content inside of the file. Then we have text equal implode, and we want to implode it with the new line, so \n, and our out array. Then we have text dot equal, basically concatenating after this, 2 new lines, so \n/n. Let's place a few hyphens, then again \n/n, just a little bit of a formatting of a text file. And fwrite, we have fp or file, and we provide a second argument as text, which we've just created basically here. Then we need to close the file, so close, and we need to pass the instance of the file. Okay, so that's our methods done. Now if we open our browser, we need to create our log folder. If we scroll right to the top, let's look for our log file here somewhere. We've got a log file. At the moment it's null, but obviously after our constructor we have already the path assigned to it. So we've got log folder, which is what we need to create in the root of our site. It's going to be log. Let's assign the permissions of 755 is fine, so if we keep it this way. And then obviously we need to create the file called IPN log. So new file IPN.log, and we keep it that way. Permissions, yeah, let's keep it as 644. We'll see if it's going to work. Sometimes keep the permissions as low as possible. Go high if you have to. Obviously, you don't want anyone to write to your files. Okay, so that's done inside of the PayPal class. I think we could start testing our IPN now. Everything seems to be finished here. We've got our IPN, save into the database, save log, database files seem to be fine as well. Okay, so let's move to the next video and do some testing. Before we start testing, I need to amend one line here. Length obviously should be length th, and that's inside of our send curl method. If you've made the same mistake, then please amend it before you start testing it. Now, to test our application, we need to move the entire system to the remote server. We cannot test this application, including IPN, on our local machine, because obviously we don't have any domain name set up on our computer. So I've already created a tutorial in the past which explains how to upload dynamic application to the server, to the remote server, together with the database basically. So if you don't know how to do it, please refer to it. If you don't know how to find this tutorial, please contact me, and I'll be obviously happy to provide you with the link and all the information. Now, once the application is inside of our public HTML or htdocs folder, whichever root folder for your site on the remote server is, and obviously database is also set, you've uploaded your database file as well, SQL file to create obviously MySQL database on the remote server. And then you will have to go to your classes folder, open your database class, and change your username, database name, and password to your MySQL server on your remote server, obviously. So all these things have to be done before we start testing. So now we can go to our website and start testing. So let's add a few items to the basket. We add these two. Go to view basket and update the quantities. The first one 2 and the second one 3. Click on the update button. You can see quantities on the left as well as in the main basket have updated. Now if we click on the checkout button, if we now log in, we confirm all our details by clicking next button, and now we are presented with the order summary. Everything seems fine, so let's click on proceed to PayPal button. And while we are being redirected to PayPal, let's go to our database, click on the orders table, and then on the browse tab. As you can see, our new order has been added to the system, so everything seems to be fine. If we look at our orders items and browse as well, you can see our two products have been added to orders items table with the relevant quantities. Price as well has been populated. So everything seems to be working fine. Obviously, when we come back from PayPal, the PayPal status, TXN ID, and payment status will change accordingly, depending on obviously what information, what payment status we're gonna get from IPN. But I'm going to show you this in just a second. Let's just go through our process. As you can see, our new template has been applied to the theme, PayPal theme. As you can see, obviously the fields of the form, credit card form, have also been pre-populated with the information which we've sent to PayPal with this request. And then obviously, because we are using Sandbox, we're going to log in with our Sandbox email address, which is for our personal use, which is as a obviously logging in as a buyer. So let's provide a password and hit on the login button. Now we should be presented with the order summary again. Review your payment. As you can see, everything seems fine. It's our address as well and our email address. So let's click on Pay Now, and this is when the payment is basically happening. Now we've got a confirmation with transaction ID. We can click on Return to Test Store to get back to our site and see that thank you message basically. Now if we go to our database, as you can remember, we had our PayPal status 0, TXN ID null, and payment status null as well. If we now refresh this table, we should see these fields being updated by IPN. So if we refresh, and there we go. As you can see, PayPal status is now 1, which means the order has been processed and is active. So we've activated this order. We now know that we can dispatch items to the client basically. TXN ID, in case we ever need to investigate this order in any way. This is our identification numbers as well. So and obviously payment status as completed. So everything seems fine. Now if we go back to our editor, we can actually close this PayPal class, check our log file. So we open a log folder and open our IPN.log. As you can see, all these information received from PayPal have also been added to this file. So we have the order confirmation in this file as well. So if we need to check anything about the order, we can basically check it here. So that's everything about testing our application. So let's move to the next chapter. Okay, I know I did say we're moving to the next chapter, but this log file is just bothering me too much. Obviously, we are saving to the file which may have permission 777 in order for PHP to be able to write into this file, and I'm not happy with this. Because obviously 777 means everyone can write anything to this file, and you don't want people to have access to your server in any way. Okay, so what we're going to do instead is we're going to put all this information to the database, to our order table exactly. So together with our order, we're going to place all this information. We're not going to be bothered creating several fields. We're just going to create one, and we basically put all this lot, all this data from IPN into this field, because it's fairly unlikely you're gonna ever use this information. If you will use this information for any purpose, then you will be able to obviously get all this information from one field, displaying them on a page using HTML, some HTML tags and so on. So let's create another field right after payment status in our orders table. So payment status and go, and this one will be IPN. And we're going to make it text. Okay, we can now save the table. So we have our IPN field. If we go back to our editor, open our classes folder and our PayPal.php. If we scroll right to the bottom, there's our IPN method. So we won't be using save log method anymore, and instead we're going to change the approve one. So for the approve one, we are going to send the entire IPN data array, plus we're going to send the result, the IPN result. So 2 parameters only. We can actually put them on the separate lines anyway, so that should be fine. Now we can remove all this, actually like that. So we're passing array and the result. So now what we're going to do, we need to obviously open our order class and search for our approve method, which was right at the bottom here. So we obviously need to modify this slightly. So first of all, we're going to have an array here, by default null, and the second one will be, what was it actually? It was result, so result null. Okay, and we can remove all these here, and we only check if is an empty array and is an empty result. Okay, now we need payment status. So obviously, first of all, we need to check also if array key exists, and we're going to be looking for, if we look at this, txn ID, and we're looking for this inside of our array, and we're going to put it on separate lines as well. So this is one of the conditions, and then array key exists, and this time we're looking for payment status, because these ones are the ones which we actually need. And again, array key exists, custom, which is basically the ID of our order record. Obviously, we need to put array here as well as second parameter for array key exists. Okay, so if it does, then we are going to execute our statement. I'm going to close this browser here so that it doesn't, so we can see it a little bit better. So obviously, all this needs to go inside of this if statement here. Okay, slightly indented. Okay, so now we check array status, obviously, so it's going to be payment status index of our array. So if array payment status equals completed, then active equals 1, otherwise it equals 0. So that's fine. Now, payment status, we obviously need to use our array now. So, sorry, it's going to be array, and we passing, actually no, we're going to be passing active because this is manually generated value, so that's fine. But for txn ID, we're going to use our array and index txn underscore ID from this array. For payment status, we will use obviously payment status index, and where ID equals, and we're going to use custom here as ID of our order. Now, that's not everything, because what we also need to add is obviously we need to set another field which we've just created, which was IPN. And IPN equals, and the same thing, dot to concatenate this db escape, and we're going to create this value in a second. And after this, single quote to obviously continue with our statement. Now this one will be called, what are we going to call it? We're going to call it out. So we start here after this if statement, out equals array, and now for each array as key equals value. And now we are going to add our keys and values to our out array. So out equals, and we're going to do it in the double quotes, curly brace key, colon, value. Okay, so now we have our array with all of the values, obviously. What we need to do now is obviously concatenate this in some way. So out equals implode, and we're going to use new line character, so \n and our out array. So now we basically put in every single item of this array on a new line, and then obviously it's going to be easier to output this on the page. So we've got our out, but we also need to add our result. So we haven't added this field to the database yet, but after IPN status, we're going to add status equals single quote, then concatenation again, this db escape and the result, and then concatenation again, single quote after double one, and that should be fine. So obviously we need to create this field status here. If we go back, do we have any status here? We have status actually, so we need to call it somehow otherwise, differently basically. So what we're going to call it, let's call it response. Okay, save the file, go back, and after IPN After IPN, we want to create another one called response. Varchar is fine. Let's make it 100 characters max and save. And that should do the trick now. That's all fine. We've got all the commas in place. That should be working. Okay, and then we have query. That's all fine. Yep, okay, let's move to the next video and quickly test it again just to make sure that everything works fine. Now, a few things. As you have already seen, I make quite a lot of mistakes when I'm typing quick. So, against the IPN in our last SQL statement, obviously forgotten this arrow here, this db escape. So obviously make sure that if you've made the same mistake, please correct it. Then if we go to our table, we've created these new fields. We should assign null by default so that they are not required. So if we click on edit button, check this null checkbox against this one, and response the same. So we click on this pencil icon here, and then null again, and save. So make sure that obviously they are null by default. So now that we've done all this, if we go back to our project, click on add to basket, a couple of items gonna be fine. Then click on checkout. Okay, now we're gonna have to log in, obviously. Then we have checkout next. Then let's click on proceed to PayPal. Remember, you obviously have to be logged into your Sandbox account in order to test in Sandbox. Let's copy our personal email address and paste it in. We see password. While we are logging in, let's browse our table. The order has been added. Everything's fine. Okay, password. Okay, that works. No, that doesn't work. Make sure you enter. Okay, I've got a caps lock, sorry. Okay, now it should be fine. Now we've got the order, obviously pay now. That's all fine, and return to the test store, continue. We are back. Now if we refresh, we didn't get IPN yet. Not yet. Not yet. Okay, a few seconds longer. Not yet. Sometimes it may take longer, sometimes it may go straight away. So you have to keep pressing the refresh button until you get the IPN, basically. Nothing yet. Okay, there it is. So I've got status has been updated, TXN as well, completed. And now you can see response is verified, which is what we received after actually getting back to PayPal. After we received the IPN and the response was verified, which is cool. Then obviously let's actually click on the edit button to make sure we can see all of the information that's been saved in our table now. So you can see all this information which were previously saved to the file, the text file, now are in one field of our database. So it's a little bit safer, obviously. Everything's stored within the database rather than inside of this text file. So now we've got all this sorted, so we can go back. If we open our browser, we can completely remove this log folder together with the file, basically. And if we go to our PayPal class, obviously save log has been commented, so we can remove it. And we can also remove this private save log method, as we no longer need it, because everything is done by our IPN method when we are saving actually all the data to our table. So that's everything now. So if we move to the next chapter and start building the clients area.